Welcome to the deep dive. You've given us your reading list. This time it's all about student loan repayment in the US, sort of late 2023, early 2024.
Right, and specifically looking at some really interesting research from WGU Labs and Savi.
Exactly. You want us to, cut through the data, the borrower experiences, and really pull out the crucial insights. No information overload.
That's the goal. Understanding the landscape now, especially after that big federal payment pause ended back in October 2023.
So our mission here is to unpack the key challenges borrowers face and maybe look at some potential solutions being talked about.
Let's do it.
Okay, so let's get right into it. That 3-year payment pause ending October 2023, that was massive. Affected what, 43.6 million borrowers? That's September 23 data.
Huge numbers. And to get a handle on it, WGU Labs and Savi, they worked with Gallup, right? Surveyed over 3,000 borrowers aged 21 to 50.
Yeah, and that was back in June 2023. The timing's key there. Gives us a snapshot before repayments really restarted. But what's really striking, even with that heads up, by December 23, some early reports were saying around 40% of borrowers actually hadn't made a payment yet.
40%?
Yeah, it really underscores that for a lot of people, the weight of these loans it's just too much, a very real burden.
It certainly sets the stage, and this research, it really drills down into who's feeling this burden the most.
Right.
The first big finding, struggle is widespread, yes,
Right.
but it's definitely not uniform. Across everyone surveyed, 43% said they were struggling before the pause ended.
And struggling means they were behind on payments or in forbearance or deferment, those temporary pauses for hardship, or already in default.
So nearly half were already having trouble, even with the pause.
It does suggest some pretty fundamental challenges there. And like you said, the impact, it really varies across different groups.
Absolutely. The data shows some, frankly, concerning disparities. For Black borrowers, that struggle rate jumps to 57%.
57. Yeah. For Latinx borrowers, 47%. Then look at education level. 52% of those without a bachelor's degree struggled, compared to just 34% of those with one.
That's a big gap.
And even gender. Women reported struggling 7 percentage points higher than men.
It really hammers home that student debt isn't this single uniform problem. It hits communities already facing economic disadvantages much harder.
And what about default rates? That's when things get really serious.
Yeah, particularly concerning there. Default rates among those without a bachelor's were nearly 3 times higher than those with a degree.
3 times.
And Black respondents had a 4% higher default rate compared to mostly white respondents.
Here's something really insightful from the study, I thought. Those borrowers without a bachelor's degree who were in default, they were actually less likely to be taking steps to get out of default compared to degree holders.
Right, which suggests it's more than just the money, doesn't it?
Exactly. It hints at maybe an information gap, a support gap. Like, are the most vulnerable feeling the least equipped to even navigate the system?
That lack of engagement, especially among those needing the most help, is a really significant point. The research also found they were less likely to even know who their loan servicer was or be familiar with repayment options.
That's basic information.
Yeah, that information asymmetry is a huge barrier to finding a way forward.
Oh, okay. So moving to the second key finding. The research connects these repayment struggles directly to some pretty negative psychological impacts. It's not just financial strain.
No, it's taking a real toll mentally. What's notable is how directly that financial stress correlates with, regret about taking out the loans, high stress levels, even hopelessness about ever paying them off.
And that affects how they see their education's value, too.
Exactly. Diminished perceived value.
The numbers really paint a picture here. Almost a quarter, 25%, regretted taking out loans. Over 40% stressed about repayment.
40% stress.
20% felt hopeless, and less than 40% felt their education was actually worth the cost.
And again, these negative feelings, they hit harder for the same groups. Women, Black, and Latinx borrowers, those without a bachelor's degree.
Any specific examples there?
Yeah, like hopelessness. For those struggling financially, 25% felt hopeless. For those not struggling, only 15%.
That's a significant difference.
And perceived value, too. Among struggling borrowers, 46% felt their education wasn't worth it. Compare that to 32% of those not struggling.
Wow. It creates a really tough cycle, doesn't it? If you feel your education wasn't worth the debt, that's got to affect motivation.
Absolutely.
Okay, finding 3. This looks at how student loans get in the way of major financial milestones, building assets.
And this is where you see the ripple effects into the broader economy. Research points to big delays. Like 55% of borrowers delayed saving for retirement.
Over half.
Yeah. Over half, 52%, delayed buying a home. Over 40% put off buying a car. And 36% even delayed moving out of their parents' house.
So it's not just about managing debt month to month. It's fundamentally altering life trajectories.
Very tangible impacts. And it's not just delays. The study found bachelor's degree holders with loans had fewer financial assets overall.
Compared to degree holders without loans.
Exactly. Fewer retirement accounts, investments, insurance, savings, emergency funds, lower home ownership rates.
So even if you get the degree, the debt burden can seriously hold back wealth building.
Right. It almost seems to, well, counteract some of the intended financial benefits of getting that degree in the first place.
Okay. The fourth finding moves into personal milestones and pursuing more education. It's hitting more than just the wallet.
Definitely. The loans cause delays in pursuing a passion career for 39%, starting or expanding a family for 34%, even getting married or into a domestic partnership for 29%.
That's quite personal. Any variations there?
Interestingly, yes. Those with a bachelor's degree and men actually reported more delays in marriage and family plans specifically.
Huh. Okay. And what about wanting more education, given the debt?
This is a really critical point. Overall, 46% of borrowers felt they needed a higher degree for their career.
Okay, makes sense.
But only 26% said they were actually very likely to go for it in the next 5 years. Big gap.
Yeah, nearly half feel they need it, but only about a quarter feel they can pursue it.
And the gap is even starker for those without a bachelor's degree. Get this, 74% of them felt they needed a higher degree,
Wow, three-quarters.
but only 23% felt they were likely to pursue it.
That's a huge disconnect. The very people who might benefit most feel blocked by their current debt.
It highlights a major barrier to upward mobility.
Yeah.
There is maybe a small positive note here, though.
Okay.
The research did find Black and Latinx borrowers reported being more willing to return to education compared to mostly white respondents. So the drive is there despite the challenges.
That's good to hear. So given all these challenges, financial, psychological, life milestones, what do the researchers suggest? They had a couple of calls to action, right? Starting with better borrower education.
Absolutely crucial,
Yeah.
especially when you look at the data showing how many borrowers, particularly those without degrees, just aren't aware of their options.
Like the repayment plans and forgiveness programs.
Exactly. They point out really low use of public service loan forgiveness, PSLF, the one for public sector workers.
Yeah.
Only 24% of those likely eligible were actually using it.
24%, that seems incredibly low.
It is. And similarly, income-driven repayment plans, IDR, where payments are tied to income, only 33% of low-income borrowers were on one. A concerning 26% were just stuck in deferment or forbearance, which often isn't a long-term solution.
So is it just that the system is too complex to navigate?
That seems to be a huge part of it. The report really emphasizes that educating borrowers needs to be a shared responsibility
Shared by whom?
by colleges and universities themselves, by independent borrower advocates, and even by employers.
Okay, employers. That leads into the second call to action, expanding employers' student loan benefits. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, this is interesting because it's pitched as potentially a win-win. Employer support helps employees manage debt, which improves their well-being.
And maybe makes them less likely to leave their job.
Exactly. Reduces turnover, which saves businesses money. Plus, there's a federal tax incentive. Employers can contribute up to $5,250 per employee per year towards loan repayment, tax-free.
That's pretty significant, but are many employers actually doing this?
Well, the survey found only 21% of respondents said their employer offered these benefits.
Still quite low then.
It is.
Yeah.
But there's a potentially big development with the Secure 2.0 Act. That kicked in January 2024. It allows employers to match employee student loan payments with contributions to their retirement accounts, like a 401k.
Oh, okay. So you pay your student loan, your employer puts money in your retirement.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
It could be a real game changer for people trying to juggle debt repayment and saving for the future. The report actually quotes Andy Hooper, the CEO of Hart House,
Right.
who talked about recognizing how financial stress impacts employee engagement and why offering these benefits is valuable.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. A less financially stressed employee is probably a better employee.
And finally, the report zooms out a bit, touches on the bigger picture, the systemic issues behind this crisis.
Right, because better education and employer benefits help current borrowers, but they don't stop the problem for future students.
Exactly. The report summarizes how all these negative impacts, financial, personal, psychological, are interconnected and worsen existing inequalities. These actions help, but they don't fix the root causes.
So what kind of root causes are we talking about? What needs fundamental change?
Well, the report stresses the need to really tackle college unaffordability itself, the high cost of living for students, and maybe look at institutions that aren't delivering good outcomes. It calls for more ambitious solutions.
Solutions that go beyond just managing the debt we already have.
Precisely, addressing why higher ed costs so much in the first place.
Okay. So wrapping up this deep dive on the WGU Labs and Savi research, it really paints a pretty concerning picture, how student debt weighs on millions, hitting certain groups particularly hard, those without degrees, women, Black and Latinx borrowers.
That's right. It's clearly not just a line item on a budget. It impacts mental health, life choices, economic security. The report offers really valuable insights into the depth of the problem, but also some potential, pathways forward.
It definitely gives us a lot to think about and maybe leaves us with this final thought. Given these incredibly far-reaching consequences for individuals and the whole economy, what kind of fundamental shifts do we really need in how we finance higher education so future generations don't end up in this same drowning in debt situation?
That's the multi-billion-dollar question, isn't it?
It is something to mull over. And if you want to dig deeper, definitely check out the full reports from WGU Labs and Savi. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.